For 6 months, no one reported her missing. Not her coworkers, not her neighbors, not even me. And when I finally opened apartment 4B, I realized she had not disappeared. She had been preparing. I have owned rental properties on Mack Avenue in Detroit for 22 years, and nothing in those years prepared me for what I found. Inside that unit, Sarah Mercer had been my tenant for 3 years, and she was the kind of person landlords never worry about. She paid her rent on the first of every month, without fail, without reminders, and without excuses. She was 28 years old and taught 4th grade at Schultz Academy on the East Side. Her students adored her, and she spoke about them constantly, with quiet pride. Then October arrived, and for the first time in 3 years, the rent did not. The first day passed without explanation, then the second, then the third. Late payments happen. Silence does not. I called her phone 3 times that first week, and each call went directly to voicemail without ringing. No delay, no signal, just immediate silence. I sent text messages and later mailed a formal letter to apartment 4B, but nothing came back. Across the hallway, Mrs. Patterson mentioned she had not seen Sarah in weeks. That word sat wrong. Weeks is not a busy schedule. Weeks is not a cold. Weeks is something else. November arrived and still no rent came, and still no reply came, and her voicemail box was now completely full. I contacted Schultz Academy expecting something simple. The secretary paused before answering, and that pause told me more than her words. Sarah had not reported to work since late September. 6 weeks without work, 6 weeks without rent, and not a single missing persons report had been filed. That was when the silence stopped feeling inconvenient and started feeling deliberate. I requested a wellness check from Detroit PD Eastern District, and an officer knocked without response. December passed, then January. The hallway outside apartment 4B remained undisturbed, like a stage frozen mid-scene. By February, I had waited long enough, and 6 months of unanswered questions left no choice. I stood outside her door on a cold Tuesday morning, holding my master key and feeling something I could not yet name. Michigan tenant law required 3 knocks before entry, and each knock echoed down the narrow corridor. It sounded heavier than courtesy. It sounded final. I inserted the key slowly, and the lock turned without resistance, and the door drifted inward into darkness. Darkness greeted me first, then the air, not decay, not rot, something stale, something sealed, like a room that had been waiting for someone to notice. I reached for the light switch, and the bulb flickered twice before filling the apartment with pale yellow light. And that was when I understood this was never about unpaid rent. It was about escape. The apartment looked exactly as Sarah had left it on whatever day she walked out, and that detail unsettled me more than anything broken or overturned ever could. Nothing was disturbed, nothing appeared forced, nothing suggested struggle. Her coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, with a dark ring of dried coffee inside, and a spoon resting neatly beside it. The spoon was aligned carefully, as if she expected to return within minutes. The television remote rested perfectly on the arm of the couch, positioned exactly where someone would set it before stepping away briefly. The room did not feel abandoned. It felt paused. A library book lay open face down on the coffee table, and when I turned it slightly, my eyes fixed immediately on the title, The Lovely Bones. That title did not feel accidental, sitting in the center of an empty apartment. Her kitchen calendar still displayed September, and the last date circled in red marker read September 27th. Parent Conferences was written beneath it in her handwriting. That was the final day, Anyone at Schultz Academy saw her sequence. Matters. I moved slowly through the apartment, touching nothing and studying everything with a focus I had never needed in 2 decades. Her bedroom was equally undisturbed, and the bed was made tightly with a white comforter pulled smooth. It looked like the bed of someone who expected to sleep in it again that night. Her phone charger remained plugged into the wall beside the bed, and her reading glasses sat folded on the nightstand. A half-empty glass of water stood beside those glasses untouched. People who plan to disappear do not leave behind the tools they need to see. They do not leave water mid-drink. They do not leave books mid-chapter 1. Opened her closet expecting to see empty space, but everything remained. Winter coats, boots, sweaters, and scarves waited for a Detroit winter she never faced. Whatever happened to Sarah Mercer happened quickly, and without preparation, I returned to the kitchen and noticed something I had missed during my first sweep. The back of the apartment door had 3 additional deadbolt locks installed at uneven heights. Those locks were not part of the original unit when she signed her lease. 3 extra locks do not suggest inconvenience. They suggest fear. The screws were slightly misaligned, which meant she likely installed them herself. I imagined her tightening each bolt at night, listening for footsteps in the hallway. You do not reinforce a door like that unless you believe someone will try again. Beneath the kitchen sink, I found something that made my hands shake for the first time. A prepaid burner phone still sealed in its original packaging from a CVS on East Jefferson Avenue. The receipt remained tucked inside, and the purchase date read September 20th, exactly 1 week before she was last seen at school. That was not coincidence. People buy burner phones when their real number becomes unsafe. Sarah Mercer had not vanished impulsively. She had been preparing, and the more I looked around apartment 4B, the clearer that preparation became. I stepped back into the center of the kitchen and called Detroit PD Eastern District from my own phone. 45 minutes later, Detective Marcus Webb walked into that pale yellow light, and the look on his face told me this was no longer just a landlord problem. Bad Detective Marcus Webb carried 19 years with Detroit PD Eastern District in the way he moved and in the silence he allowed to stretch. He did not rush through apartment 4B, he absorbed it. He photographed everything before touching anything and began at the front door, working inward with deliberate control. His pace made the apartment feel less like a mystery and more like a crime scene waiting to speak. When he reached the 3 additional deadbolts, he stopped completely and studied them without comment. That silence lasted long enough to make my pulse shift. He crouched slightly, examining the uneven screws, and ran his fingers lightly along the metal. Those locks meant something. When he located the unopened burner phone beneath the kitchen sink, he sealed it carefully. Inside an evidence bag, his expression did not change, but the weight in the room did. After completing his walkthrough, he turned toward me and asked a single question. Did Sarah Mercer ever mention feeling unsafe or uncomfortable around someone during the time she lived here? The question forced me to search backward through months of ordinary conversations. That was when I remembered something from August that I had dismissed entirely. I had been checking the boiler in the basement when Sarah appeared at the gym doorway looking specifically for me. She asked whether the building had security cameras covering the entrance and parking area along Mack Avenue. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shifted toward the stairwell behind me, as if expecting someone to appear. I told her the entrance camera worked, but the parking camera had been broken for months. She nodded slowly and stared at the corner. where that camera once hung. At the time, I assumed she was being cautious, standing inside her empty apartment in February. I understood she had been calculating angles, calculating exposure. Detective Webb wrote every detail into his notepad without interruption. Then he said something that made the kitchen feel smaller. No formal missing persons report had ever been filed for Sarah Mercer. 6 months had passed, and not a single official report existed in Wayne County records. Not from family, not from friends, not from coworkers. Detective Webb explained what that kind of silence usually means. Either no one close enough realized she was truly gone, or the people who knew were too frightened to make anything official. That second possibility lingered long after he closed his notepad. He looked toward the hallway outside apartment 4B and asked quietly, who else in this building might have known she was afraid? And that was when our attention shifted toward apartment 4A across the hall. Before Detective Webb left the Hargrove building that afternoon, he knocked on apartment 4A directly across from Sarah's door. Mrs. Gloria Patterson opened immediately, as if she had been standing just behind it, waiting for someone to finally ask. Her eyes moved from Webb's badge to my face, and the expression she wore carried relief mixed with something heavier. I have been waiting since October for someone to come ask about that poor girl, she said before either of us spoke. She invited us inside without hesitation and motioned toward her kitchen table with hands that trembled slightly. She poured coffee slowly, as if steadying herself for something she had been holding in for months. In early September, she began noticing a dark-colored sedan parking repeatedly along Mack Avenue, facing the building entrance. The car appeared between 10 at night and 2 in the morning on several separate nights. It always sat in the same position, facing the door, watching. She saw Sarah glance down toward that vehicle from her second-floor window on 3 different occasions. Each time Sarah pulled the curtain shut quickly and stepped back into darkness. That reaction told Mrs. Patterson more than any words could have. On September 25th, at around 11:30, she heard raised voices in the hallway outside her apartment. She looked through her peephole and saw Sarah standing near her door, speaking with a man she had never seen before. He was tall with dark hair, wearing a gray jacket, and he stood closer than comfort allows. He spoke quietly, but with an intensity that made Mrs. Patterson uneasy. Even through a closed door, Sarah kept her apartment door partially open behind her, as if ready to retreat instantly. The conversation lasted approximately 4 minutes, but those minutes stretched heavy and uncomfortable. Then the man turned and walked toward the stairwell without looking back. Sarah remained in the hallway alone for several long seconds. After he disappeared, Mrs. Patterson heard the first lock engage, then a second, then a third, and finally a fourth. That sequence echoed through the quiet hallway and stayed with her long after. She never saw Sarah Mercer in that hallway again. The building felt different after that night, quieter, but not peaceful. Detective Webb asked if she could describe the man further in any detail. Without hesitation, she reached into the pocket of her floral housecoat. She removed a folded piece of paper worn soft at the edges. It was the license plate number of the dark sedan parked on Mack Avenue. She wrote it down on September 23rd because something inside her said she absolutely should. Detective Webb studied that number longer than expected. Then he asked quietly, what if that car was not just watching? What if it was waiting? Detective Webb ran the license plate early the next morning at Eastern District Headquarters, and what appeared on his screen immediately shifted the tone of the entire investigation. The plate was registered to Daniel Crow, age 34, with the last known address on the far west side of Detroit, near Dearborn. His file was not clean. 2 prior restraining order violations sat in Wayne County records filed by 2 different women between 2018 and 2021. Both cases describe the same pattern: refusal to accept the end escalation after rejection. Persistent contact that turned into surveillance. This was not random, it was repetition. Detective Webb pulled months of security footage from the working camera above the Hargrove building entrance and began reviewing it frame by frame. Late nights, empty sidewalks, parked vehicles. Daniel Crow appeared 11 separate times between July and September, always after dark and always in the same position, facing the entrance. Watching, waiting. Watching is never the end. Watching is the beginning. On September 27th, the camera recorded Sarah leaving at 7:15 in the morning with her school bag over her shoulder. She paused at the doorway and looked carefully in both directions along Mack Avenue before stepping outside. That pause lasted seconds, but it revealed everything. She was not just leaving for work, she was assessing threat. That was the final footage of Sarah Mercer walking freely from her building after that morning. She never appeared on the entrance camera again. Detective Webb expanded the search radius and contacted Eastern Market Security, requesting additional footage. On September 29th, Sarah's silver Honda Civic appeared parked on Rio Pelli Street at 11:40 in the morning. A weekday during school hours, she remained seated inside her car for 12 full minutes before stepping out. 12 minutes is not hesitation. 12 minutes is calculation. She exited the vehicle and walked directly toward a payphone. Most people in Detroit forgot still existed. She made a 3-minute call from that payphone before returning to her car. Detroit PD subpoenaed the call records and traced that call to a domestic violence shelter on the north side. That detail reframed the entire case. Sarah had not vanished impulsively. She had been executing a plan. She purchased a burner phone. She reinforced her door. She researched camera blind spots. She chose an unmonitored corner. She controlled her digital trace. She was not running blindly. She was disappearing strategically. And after September 29th, Daniel Crow stopped appearing on camera altogether. That absence raised a new question. Did he lose track of her? Or did something happen beyond the reach of surveillance? Detective Webb located Daniel Crow 3 weeks after. I opened apartment 4B, and this time there would be no surveillance from a distance. He stood at Crow's west side residence with his badge visible and a partner positioned slightly behind him on the narrow porch. Crow opened the door without hesitation and denied everything before Webb finished his first sentence. His tone carried the calm confidence of someone who believed watching was not a crime, but this was no longer about watching. Webb laid out the evidence carefully. 11 nights of surveillance footage, repeated phone calls escalating over months, 2 prior restraining order violations, and a witness who wrote down his plate number. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was undeniable. The investigation revealed Sarah had ended the relationship in January 8 months before she vanished from apartment 4B. Crow refused to accept that ending, and the calls began slowly. Once a week, then twice, then daily, then multiple times a day. When the calls stopped working, he changed tactics. He began parking outside her building along Mack Avenue, watching her window from the dark. Watching turned into intimidation. Intimidation turned into control. Sarah recognized that shift long before anyone else did. She documented his behavior quietly and saved evidence carefully. She reinforced her door, and purchased a burner phone. She researched shelters and camera blind spots. She'd planned the domestic violence shelter confirmed. Sarah Mercer arrived there on September 30th under a different name. She remained for 2 weeks before being relocated through the shelter network to another city outside Michigan. Her location was sealed, her identity adjusted. Her trail intentionally erased. Sarah Mercer was alive. She had not been taken. She had escaped. Daniel Crow was arrested on stalking and protective order violations in Wayne County. He was processed and held awaiting trial, and the dark sedan never returned to Mack Avenue. But one detail stayed with me longer than his arrest. 6 months had passed before anyone filed anything official. Not family, not coworkers, not friends. The silence around her disappearance had been louder than the threat itself, and that realization unsettled me more than anything I found inside apartment 4B. Daniel Crow was arrested 6 weeks after the investigation began, and the charges were more serious than he expected. He faced stalking violations and breaches of a protective order already filed in Wayne County records. The prosecutor added additional counts after reviewing surveillance footage and subpoenaed phone records collected during the investigation. Crow was held in Wayne County Jail, awaiting trial, and the dark sedan never returned to Mack Avenue again. The nights outside the Hargrove building grew quiet, but the quiet felt different this time. It no longer felt watched. It felt aware. Mrs. Gloria Patterson cried softly when Detective Webb told her Sarah was alive somewhere safe outside Michigan. She said she had prayed every night since October, and each prayer felt uncertain, but she never stopped believing someone would eventually ask the right questions. I stood inside apartment 4B one final time after the case concluded and looked at the kitchen counter. The coffee mug still rested there with its dried ring unchanged by months. The open library book remained face down on the coffee table beneath that pale yellow light. The title no longer felt tragic, it felt deliberate. Standing there, I understood something I had missed. Before Sarah did not leave in chaos, she left in control. She left the book open, not as a cry for help, but as evidence of interruption. I returned the book to the Detroit Public Library on Woodward Avenue the following morning, without explanation. The librarian scanned it, quietly as if it were any other overdue return. I had the 3 additional deadbolts removed by a locksmith in early March once the investigation closed, but I kept one. It sits in my desk drawer even now, because fear installed it, but courage turned it. And sometimes survival looks like disappearing before anyone realizes you are in danger. I have owned rental properties on Mack Avenue for 22 years, and I have never told this story publicly until now. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. And quiet stories are the ones people overlook. I am telling it because of a 73-year-old retired nurse and a folded piece of paper. She looked through her peephole one September night, and something felt wrong. She did not ignore that feeling. She found a pen and wrote down a license plate number because instinct told her she absolutely should. That small decision sat in her pocket for 6 months, waiting. It gave Detective Webb somewhere to begin, and it gave Sarah Mercer time. We consume stories like this as if they are finished episodes, as if they are entertainment instead of warnings. But Sarah left her coffee on the counter because she was interrupted by fear. She left her book open because she expected to return. She installed 3 deadbolts because one lock was no longer enough. She researched blind spots in Eastern Market. She chose a forgotten payphone. She made a 3-minute call that changed everything. She was 28, a 4th grade teacher. smarter and braver than most people will ever need to be. I still drive past the Hargrove building some nights and look up at the dark window of apartment 4B. I hope she has one lock on her new door, and that one is finally enough. I hope she has a coffee mug in her kitchen and a book open on her table, not because she is hiding, but because she is home. If this story stayed with you, then pay attention to that feeling, because survival sometimes begins with noticing what others overlook. Tell me in the comments what moment unsettled you the most. And if you want more real stories like this from Detroit and beyond, then subscribe and stay with me, because sometimes the difference between disappearance and survival is who was paying attention.
If you love true creepy horror stories like this, like, share and subscribe to The Day Everything Changed TV.